I want to thank you for joining us today for this video Bible study. As you know, the road conditions and the weather make it to where it's not possible for all of us to be able to gather together for worship at the church building at Oak Ridge. And so we're grateful that you've decided to tune in and join us for this Bible study. I would ask you to turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 42. Uh, the study that we're going to be doing this morning is actually a continuation of our study that we've been going through on Sunday evenings. The study has been a study looking at the life of Joseph. And so the study that we're going to be in today in Genesis chapter 42 is really looking at the time when Joseph's brothers first arrive in Egypt to buy grain because of a mega famine that was affecting not just Egypt, but most of the Mediterranean and part of the Middle East. And so, as we normally do on our study on Sunday nights, I sort of keep us in line with the biblical timeline, which sort of falls into the timeline of world history at the same time. And so we always start off talking a little bit about that. And the chapter that we read in Genesis chapter 42, that chapter actually starts in around the year of 1658 BC. Most likely it occurred within the first few years of the famine. So it may not exactly be 1658, it may actually be 1657 to 1656, but we know that that the famine has already began, and they've already had the 7 years of good crops and good weather, and now they're facing the next 7 years of famine. And Joseph has helped Pharaoh in Egypt prepare for this, and so the famine has occurred or started anyway. And here Joseph's family, as we'll see tonight, his 10 brothers come to Egypt to find food because they don't have any food in Canaan where they're at. So I'd ask for you to look in your Bibles. We're going to first look at how Jacob's sons, Joseph's brothers, went to Egypt. Look at verses 1 through 4 with me in Genesis chapter 42. And I'm reading from the CSB, the Christian Standard Bible. And so you can use that. You could use a different translation if you want. But we're looking at verses 1 through 4 to begin with. It says, "When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, 'Why do you keep looking at each other?' 'Listen,' he went on, 'I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, that we will live and not die.' So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he thought something might happen to him." So the famine that had affected southern Canaan and Egypt and much of the Mediterranean at this time was affecting Joseph's family in Canaan. They most likely lived in the region of Hebron, which is where it's believed that they were at during this time. And so this part of the world was affected by the famine just as much as other areas were. And so we don't know where he heard it, but Jacob somehow got word that there was grain in Egypt and that they were selling it. And so Jacob, no doubt, was aggravated by, basically his son's lack of leadership, because he was an elderly man at this point, about 130 years old, and his sons were in their 40s, in their mid 40s at the oldest. And so he was just sort of disappointed in the lack of leadership that these sons of his were not taking when it came to providing for the family and making sure that everything was what it needed to be. And so Jacob, you can tell, is kind of aggravated when he says, "Why do you keep looking at each other?" This is probably what we would say is sort of the biblical way of saying, "Why are you just standing around? Why are you not doing something? Why is something not being done about our situation?" And so, like I said, Jacob is about 130 years old at this point. His oldest sons are in their mid 40s, most likely, at this time. And here he is still being forced to tell them exactly what to do. I think we would all agree that someone in their mid 40s, I'm 44, about to turn 45, you would think that someone my age would be responsible enough to see, hey, our family is running out of food. The famine is making it impossible to grow grain and things like that. So we need to do something. Well, Joseph's brothers, Jacob's sons, never really took it upon themselves to put that initiative into place. And so Jacob has to, again, lead and tell them exactly what to do. And so he told them to go and buy food for their family down in Egypt. And as he put it, so we'll live and not die. And so Jacob is just trying to get them to understand that, this is a very dire situation and y'all need to get your act together, as we would say. And so 10 of Jacob's remaining sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Dan, Gad, Judah, Naphtali, Issachar, Asher, and Zebulun, they pack up their donkeys and their gear, and they travel to Egypt. And so this means that his youngest son, Benjamin, the last son born to him from his favorite wife, Rachel, was to remain at home with him. He didn't allow Benjamin to go. And we're even told sort of in the text that he's worried that something would happen to Benjamin. So he didn't want anything to happen to him. And I think that this was because it was that last connection he had to of his 4 wives, the one that he felt was his favorite. And so this was his last connection with Rachel, because Rachel had died, and also to him, Joseph had died. And so he thought he wouldn't take a chance with Benjamin. And so if you look on into verses 5 through 14, we see that his 10 sons, when they get to Egypt, it's debated on whether they're the 10 sons of one man or whether they are actually spies. And so look at verses 5 through 14 with me in your Bibles and follow along with me. It says, the sons of Israel were among those who came to buy grain, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Joseph was in charge of the country. He sold grain to all its people. His brothers came and bowed before him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized it, but he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From the land of Canaan to buy food," they replied. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Joseph remembered his dreams about them and said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see the weakness of the land?" "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food," they said. "We are all the sons of one man. We are honest. Your servants are not spies." "No," he said to them, you have come to see the weakness of the land." But they replied, "We, your servants, were 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no longer living." Then Joseph said to them, "I have spoken. You are spies." So verse 6 right here in this text, it shows us really God's sovereign hand over world events. Because of all the storehouse cities in Egypt that Joseph had set up, and of all the Egyptian officials who were actually selling grain from those storehouses or storehouse cities, Jacob's sons end up in front of their brother Joseph without even knowing it. And so Joseph has them at a marked disadvantage because he recognizes them, but they do not recognize him. They probably had it was probably the furthest thing from their mind that the person before them could be Joseph, because they had sold him into slavery and they just assumed he was a slave somewhere, most likely in Egypt. But Joseph recognized his brothers, and plus, to add to that disadvantage he had them at, they didn't speak Egyptian, but he spoke Hebrew. So he was able to understand everything they said, despite working through an interpreter to make it seem like he didn't speak Hebrew. So we're told that he treats them harshly, that he treats them roughly. But what we know is that that's probably in part so that they would not recognize him. Because if he led on with certain mannerisms or certain inflections in his tone with the people, they may have started to pick up on the fact that this was their younger brother Joseph. But despite that, he probably was in the moment probably happy to treat them a little harshly because of what they had done to him by selling him into slavery and really being mean to him in a lot of ways, even when he was younger. And so to confirm they were who he thought they were, he asked them where they came from. And when they told him that they were from Canaan, Joseph was reminded of his dreams about them bowing before him. And we read that about the dream of the wheat and the gatherings of wheat bowing down to his, and the him being the sun and the moon and the stars bowing down, the sun and the moon and the stars bowing down to him, speaking about his stepmother and father and his brothers all bowing down to him. And so he had these dreams that reminded him or had foretold this very moment in his life and in his existence. And so Joseph very wisely accused them of being spies, wanting to really find, that what they were there for was to find out the weaknesses of Egypt. That was a very wise ploy on his part to disguise who he was and to keep them off balance in not figuring out who he was right away. And, this would have given him ample opportunity to really ask questions of his brothers about the family without giving away who he was. And it would give him the opportunity to ask these questions and ply them for information without them even realizing who he was and what he was doing. So he continued to accuse them of being spies, and they continued to deny it. They even went so far as to tell Joseph, they told him, "We, your servants, were 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no longer living." And so they had chalked Joseph up to being dead. That's the lie that they had told their father Jacob, and that's the lie that they had been holding on to for 20 years. And so here they were. It was second nature for them to describe Joseph as being dead, and in this case, for Benjamin to be with their father in Canaan. And so, despite what they said about being, 10 of 12 brothers, Joseph still accused them of being a spy. And so, I want you to look with me in your Bibles at verses 15 through 20, and we're going to look at Joseph's test that he has for them. That is a rather complicated test, but it's a test that he's using as the second person in command of all of Egypt to prove they're not spies. But it's really Joseph's way of making sure that everything is still what his brothers are saying that it is in the land of Canaan. So look at verses 15 through 20 with me. It says, "This is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one from among you to get your brother. The rest of you will be imprisoned so that your words can be tested to see if they are true. If they are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." So Joseph imprisoned them together for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph said to them, "I fear God. Do this and you will live. If you are honest, let one of you be confined to the guardhouse, while the rest of you go and take grain to relieve the hunger of your households. Bring your youngest brother to me so that your words can be confirmed. Then you won't die." And they consented to this. So we aren't told what Joseph's motive was for testing his brothers, but it may have been a way to stay around them so that he could hear what they had to say. And or it may have even been a way to get more of his family to come to Egypt. We know the official version is that he's trying to test them to see if they're spies, but I'm sure that Joseph had, from a personal standpoint, a lot of reasons, I guess I should say, for why he was trying to test his brothers like this. Maybe he was hoping that Jacob would make the trip. Maybe Benjamin and Jacob would come together down to where he was at in the city of Memphis along the Nile River there in Egypt. But we don't know why, but he gives them this test. And this test is given, basically to keep up the ruse of him being or the brothers being spies in Egypt. So he says that he's going to imprison all of them and then let one of them go back to get the younger brother, Benjamin, and bring him back. And then all of the brothers would be freed once he knew that they were telling the truth. That was his first test. And so he threw them in prison in jail for 3 days. And on the third day, he goes to them and he changed the test on them. How would you like for your teachers to have done that to you in school? Say, okay, prepare for this test, get ready for this test. And then the day of the test, they say, oh, that test isn't the one you're going to take. This is the one you need to take. So, I mean, that's basically what Joseph did to them. So they were probably, when he walked into their cell, they were probably expecting to send one of them, and they probably had already decided which one of the 10 brothers would go to speak to Jacob and get Benjamin and come back to rescue the rest of them. And so in this moment, Joseph walks in and he changes the test on them. And so he agreed to let all of them go, but instead, what he decided to do was that he would let, instead of letting that one go, he was going to instead change the test on them. And so we see that in the next little bit. So he agrees to let, that imprisoned brother go free, but then changes this test. So the brothers consented to Joseph's test, to his requirement. They really had no bargaining power in this moment with Joseph because they were prisoners. And so they really were consenting or agreeing under duress. So look with me at verses 21 through 28, and we see that this is where Joseph changes the test on them. And we see that Simeon is left in Egypt. Look at verses 21 through 28 with me. It says, then they said to each other, obviously we are being punished for what we did to our brother, speaking about Joseph. We saw his deep distress when he pleaded with us, but we would not listen. That is why this trouble has come to us. But Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to harm the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must account for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph understood them, since there was an interpreter between them. He turned away from them and wept. When he turned back and spoke to them, he took Simeon from them and had him bound before their eyes. Joseph then gave orders to fill their containers with grain, return each man's silver to his sack, and then give them provisions for their journey. This order was carried out. They loaded the grain on their donkeys and left there. At the place where they lodged for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey, and he saw his silver there at the top of his bag. He said to his brothers, my silver has been returned. It's here in my bag. Their hearts sank. Trembling, they turned to one another and said, what has God done to us? So the brothers immediately jumped at the thought that it will, the reason they found themselves in this situation was because it was some form of punishment from God for the way that they had treated Joseph 20 years before. And of course, Reuben tried to get out of being fully blamed or any part of the blame, because he told his brothers that, you didn't listen to me. I told you not to harm him. But as they spoke of this life-changing event from 20 years earlier, Joseph was overcome with emotions, and he actually began to weep and had to turn away from them and hide from them so that they wouldn't see him weeping because of the hurt and the pain that had been building up over those 20 years. And so after Joseph composed himself, he had Simeon bound right there in front of his brothers. He was bound and prepared for prison, and they had him imprisoned. And so Joseph then gave the order to fill their containers with the grain, and he also told his servants to put his brothers' silver back in their grain sacks, and then also give them provisions for their travel back to Canaan. Now, the trip from Memphis in Egypt to Canaan would have been a trip of about 300 miles. So it would have taken at the very least 15 days for them to travel from Memphis all the way to Canaan, or to Hebron anyway. And so Joseph had given them a pretty substantial amount of grain and preparations for them to, basically those provisions were quite a large amount that he had to have given them as well. And so they've traveled about a day's journey, about 20 miles outside of Memphis, heading most likely sort of northeasterly towards the route that they would have traveled along the southeastern shore of the Mediterranean. And so they were about 20 miles outside of Memphis when they stopped for the first night. And one of the brothers opened up his grain sack to feed his donkey and found that his silver was in that bag. And his brothers, they all just lose it. They are beside themselves. They're terrified. They don't understand how this has happened or why this has happened. And this caused them to be not only afraid of what was going on, but now they're bringing God into the mix even more, thinking, why is God doing this? What is God doing to us? And so the last verses today from verses 29 through 38, this tells us about the brothers arriving home and telling Jacob all about what happened while they were in Egypt. And so look at verses 29 through 38 with me. It says, when they reached their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him all that had happened to them. The man who is the Lord of the country spoke harshly to us and accused us of spying on the country. We told him, we are honest and not spies. We were 12 brothers, sons of the same father. One is no longer living, and the youngest is now with our father in the land of Canaan. The man who is the Lord of the country said to us, this is how I will know if you are honest. Leave one brother with me, take food to relieve the hunger of your households, and go. Bring back your youngest brother to me, and I will know that you are not spies, but honest men. I will then give your brother back to you, and you can trade in the country. As they began emptying their sacks, there in each man's sack was his bag of silver. When they and their father saw the bags of silver, they were afraid. Their father, Jacob, said to them, it's me that you make childless. Joseph is gone and Simeon is gone. Now you want to take Benjamin. Everything happens to me. Then Reuben said to his father, you can kill my 2 sons if I don't bring him back to you. Put him in my care and I will return him to you. But Jacob answered, my son will not go down with you, for his brother is dead and he alone is left. If anything happens to him on your journey, you will bring my gray hairs down to Sheol in sorrow. So the brothers make it all the way back to most likely Hebron in Canaan, and they met up with their father Jacob, and they told him everything that happened while they were in Egypt. And for a bunch of men, these 10 men who have been completely dishonest with their father for 2 decades about the death of one of his sons. The fact that they're actually being honest about what happened is kind of refreshing and kind of surprising. But they told him about everything. They told him about the spy accusation. They told him about the answer about their father and their brothers, and how Joseph kept Simeon and expected Benjamin to come and visit Egypt. So as the brothers start emptying their sacks of grain, they find that the one brother who found his sack of grain or sack of silver or bag of silver in his sack of grain the first night after leaving Memphis, he wasn't just this rare case. All 10 of the brothers had their silver still remaining in their sacks of grain, and so they had all had that silver returned. And so, interestingly, Jacob's first thought was that he would lose 2 more sons, both Simeon and Benjamin, because of their trip down to Egypt. When you read Jacob's words there, you kind of get the feeling that he doesn't expect to see Simeon again. He kind of expects Simeon to die in Egypt or to live his life in Egypt because of one of 2 things. Maybe one, he was maybe just a pessimist in that regard, that he just expected he would never see his son again. Or secondly, he may be overly confident in the fact that he would never let Benjamin go to Egypt. And so, that's how he responds. But Reuben, Jacob's oldest son, who had even disgraced Jacob earlier back in Genesis 35:22, now Reuben, the oldest brother, he steps up and he steps forward and he tries to work out a rescue plan for Simeon. And so he offers his own two sons, who probably would have been in their early to mid 20s at this point. Reuben offers his two oldest sons as a replacement for Simeon and Benjamin if Benjamin goes to Egypt with him and anything happens to him. If he dies on the way down, Reuben's sons are Jacob's, for Jacob to slaughter. And I mean, it's a really unusual offer on Reuben's part. But nevertheless, that's what he offers, is that, Reuben is basically putting his money, or his family, where his mouth is, that he wants to make sure that they understand that if something happens to Benjamin, he's going to make it right with his father. And so Jacob just refuses, outright to allow Benjamin to go to Egypt, because he just was very fearful that something would happen to him. Look what happened to Simeon. Look what happened in his mind to Joseph. Rachel has died. He doesn't want anything to happen to Benjamin. And so, Jacob really, even in this moment, continues to show his preferential or favoritism, if you want to call it, his preferential treatment toward the family from his wife, Rachel, because Rachel was his favorite wife. And there's, the scriptures don't make any bones about that. It's very obvious from that regard. But since Joseph and Rachel were no longer there, Benjamin was the one that was receiving Jacob's favoritism. And so he claimed that if something happened to Benjamin, then it would basically kill him. It would send him to Sheol. And so Jacob's just basically saying, look, it's, I'm not going to let Benjamin go, because if something happens to him, it will put me in the grave. And so that's the end of our look at the text per se for Genesis chapter 42. Now, in our study on Sunday nights, what we have been doing is we've been looking at the lessons that are learned from Joseph. And, there are a lot of lessons learned in these chapters about Joseph's life that we can apply to our own life. And in Genesis chapter 42, what we learn is that we should be led by wisdom rather than emotions in difficult situations. And the reason for that is when his 10 brothers showed up in Egypt to buy grain, Joseph found himself in an unbelievable situation, because 20 years had passed, but the events that led to Joseph ending up in Egypt had definitely not been forgotten by Joseph. The hurt and betrayal that saw him sold into slavery, his time as a slave in Potiphar's house, his 3 years in prison, and now years of marrying an Egyptian priest's daughter, or the daughter of an Egyptian priest, and having to conform to Egyptian rules and standards, and all of this has gone on, and those feelings and emotions that Joseph was experiencing, that, for those 20 years, that just doesn't go away, and we all understand that. But here, he had the opportunity to exact revenge for the years of slavery and the years of imprisonment that his brothers had caused for him. He had a chance right here to do that. And had Joseph responded emotionally to his brothers and had them imprisoned, or maybe had them sold into slavery, if he had done that, we would find it hard to blame him, right? I mean, we would find it hard to blame him for reacting emotionally to something that his brothers had done to him like that. And so we would say that maybe they got what they deserved, or maybe we would even say they had it coming to them. But Joseph could have very easily reacted emotionally to his brothers in this moment when he sees them for the first time in 20 years. Because remember, the last time he saw them, he was begging them for his life. They would not let him be taken by these traders all the way to Egypt. And now the first time he sees them, they're begging him for food, for the opportunity to buy food. And oh, how the tables have turned, and Joseph could have reacted emotionally. But what we find is that he did not. What we see is that Joseph reacted wisely to the situation. I mean, that's what he did. He acted wisely. Now, I think that we would all agree that the best response that Joseph could have had in this moment, when he recognized his brothers and realized who was in front of him, was for him to tell them who he was from the very first encounter. That sounds like, that's probably the best option. That's the right thing he should have done. But had he done that, they could have gone back to Canaan and never told Jacob what had happened or who they had found. They didn't have a problem lying to Jacob about Joseph's death for 20 years. Why would they start to tell on themselves now and say anything to Jacob when they would have returned? But instead, Joseph wisely tested the situation by seeing what information he could get from his brothers without them really knowing he was prying for information. And so by using wisdom rather than emotions in this very difficult situation he found himself in, Joseph shows us how we should respond when we find ourselves in those difficult situations in life. I know that I've had times that I sorely regret in my life where I have not followed Joseph's example here, where I let my emotions lead me in difficult situations rather than letting godly wisdom lead me. And I think that we all can pinpoint some of those times in our life where we just let our emotions get the better of us and we responded emotionally rather than wisely. And I think that we've all had those moments. But I think we would agree that if we had let wisdom lead us in those situations rather than our emotions, then those difficult situations would have been resolved in a much better way. I think that we would all look back on them and say, yeah, it would have been handled much differently. It would have been resolved in a much better fashion if that was the case. And so, although God designed us with emotions, and emotions are in fact an important part of who we are as humans, what we know is that they're important also to who we are as followers of Christ, if we indeed are Christians who follow Christ. But the thing about our emotions is that God does not want us to let our emotions be our decision makers. Because I think we would all again agree that allowing our emotions to be our decision makers is not a wise decision. Because think about how your life would be much worse off if you allowed the emotions of anger, jealousy, or hatred, just those three emotions, to be your decision makers. That you did what you were thinking in anger, that you did what you were thinking in jealousy, that you did what you were thinking in hatred. I mean, if we allowed those emotions to be our decision makers, think about how much worse off our life would be. It would just be a horrible life. But think about on the flip side of that, how much better off your life would be if you allowed wisdom and understanding and knowledge to be your decision makers. Think about how much better off your situations would be and how they would be resolved in a much better fashion if you handled them or dealt or were led by wisdom into deciding how to best resolve situations. So ultimately, we have to consider which would be more honoring and pleasing to God, to be led by our emotions or to be led by wise, godly wisdom. And when we respond in those difficult situations, which way would be more God-honoring? Which one would be more pleasing to Him? And I think that we would all agree that allowing godly wisdom to lead us, that godly wisdom should win out over allowing our emotions to lead us in difficult situations. And so I hope that our Bible study today has been one that is challenging to you, that might help you to the next time you find yourself in a difficult situation, that you will allow wisdom and godly wisdom nonetheless to prevail in how you resolve or handle that difficult situation rather than allowing your emotions to lead or win the day. And so I want to thank you for spending some time with us today, studying the Bible from Genesis chapter 42. And for those that attend Oak Ridge on a regular basis, we plan to have regular services on Wednesday night, meaning that our youth and children will have their regular classes, and our adults will meet for the Baptist Men's Meeting and our WMU meeting. And so hope that you'll be part of that on this coming Wednesday night. And next Sunday, we hope that you'll join us as we baptize a new believer at Oak Ridge, and we'll have regular services next Sunday. Thank you again for joining us today.